Representative Smith-Warner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, heroes are all around us. Sometimes they are heroic for the small things, and sometimes heroism can result in the ultimate sacrifice in the pursuit of justice. On the afternoon of Friday, May 26th, in my district, on the eve of Memorial Day weekend, Portland and the entire state of Oregon lost two heroes far before their time. Two men were killed and one injured in their heroic effort to speak out against and attempt to placate a man who was yelling hateful, Islamophobic, and xenophobic things at two young women of color, one wearing a hijab. My hearts and thoughts are with the family and friends of those lost, those injured, those verbally assaulted, and those who now live in fear of riding or sending their kids on our public transit system. I think we all like to believe that acts of violence like this can't happen here, but of course we know that it can. This tragedy happened in the heart of my district, in one of the busiest lively hubs in the city of Portland. The Hollywood Max stop is where my son will go to catch the train to high school next year. But this is not about the Max. The issue is not about the Max or riding public transit. It's that doing the right thing is not easy. We all would like to think it is. We all tell ourselves and tell each other and hopefully tell our children to do the right thing and to stand up for your beliefs and to defend to come to the aid of the defenseless and the persecuted. And that's not easy. It's hard and it can be dangerous. And it's still incredibly important. And I will still tell my children and everyone I know that it is still so critically important to do every day in every way. So I would ask all of us to keep everyone impacted in their thoughts and to keep doing the right thing, even when we are reminded in such a horrible way of how truly hard it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. For the remonstrances, Representative Marsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I spent last Saturday evening standing and weeping with several hundred of my Ashen neighbors as we mourned the death of Taliesin Myrddin Namkai-Meche. Taliesin was stabbed to death on Friday, May 26th, when he and several other passengers on the late afternoon Max train tried to intervene with a madman who was shouting racial slurs and anti-Muslim threats at two teenage girls. Tilly was 23 years old, a son, a brother, a friend, an Ashen kid, raised right, and building a life for himself in Portland. Also slain that night was Ricky John Best, aged 53, a resident of Happy Valley. A third Good Samaritan, Micah David-Cole Fletcher, a 21-year-old music student and poet, survived the attack. Quickly, the Memorial Day holiday, intended to be a time of contemplation for the sacrifices of men and women in our military, plunged us into despair and forced us to consider another kind of hero: everyday champions willing to interrupt the course of a routine train ride to confront hate and deny intimidation. Simply said, to do the right thing. But how do we cope when standing up to hatred exacts such an inconceivable price? How do we move forward when the world we live in right now seems intent on defining us by our differences, sowing fear, and building barriers? Even in their anguish, Tilly's family shared their own answer. In a letter to the community, they wrote these words: Taliesin Myrddin lived a joyous and full life. We lost him in a senseless act that brought close to home the insidious rift of prejudice and intolerance that is too familiar, too common. He was resolute in his conduct and respect of all people. In his final act of bravery, he held true to what he believed is the way forward. He will live in our hearts forever as the just, brave, loving, hilarious, and beautiful soul he was. We ask that in honor of his memory, we use this tragedy as an opportunity for reflection and change. We choose love. May we find the grace to follow that path. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Representative. For the remonstrances, Representative Bynum.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Each morning before I head to Salem, I drop one of my babies off at the train. Like clockwork, I pull into the station, I tell him I love him, and he sometimes mumbles goodbye, and then he hops out and runs toward the Max. And then I pray. I pray he makes it to his stop at Hollywood, and then I pray he makes it to school, and then in reverse, right around 3 p.m., during committee, I pray he returns home safely. Today, colleagues, I have to tell you that his destination has been transformed. It is the site where this past Friday, 2 young girls were verbally assaulted, and in response, 3 men showed extraordinary and selfless courage. It is the site where families mourn the loss of a fragile peace and of life. It is the site where the community has to reckon with the consequences of senseless, racist violence, pacifism, and even hypocrisy. And it's also the site where I hope we can draw strength and courage for years to come. And as we go forward, I urge you to honor the lives of our children and these heroes who heeded our wake-up call. 3 men stepped up that day, including my Happy Valley neighbor, Ricky Best. They all answered the call. When they witnessed an attack on fellow Oregonians, they did what I believe we all hope we do in their situation. Without hesitation, they acted. I want to tell you about Ricky Best, who made his home in Happy Valley. He was a City of Portland employee, an Army veteran, and even at one point a candidate for Clackamas County Commissioner. He served in the military for 23 years before retiring in 2012. His colleagues described him as the kind of guy you'd go to first when you needed help. Most importantly, though, he was a father of 4 and a husband, 3 teenage sons and a 12-year-old daughter. One of his children, David, is my oldest daughter's classmate at LaSalle High School. On Friday afternoon, he was on his way home to see his family, but he never made it. To his wife and his 4 children, we mourn with you the loss of your husband and dad. He was a brave soul. But even as we mourn, I ask you, colleagues, let us all find strength in the courage and actions of these men and those that they leave behind. To quote Dr. King, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at in times of challenge and controversy. When it's time for us to answer the call, I hope that we will all follow their example.
Thank you, Representative. Further remonstrances. Representative Meek.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My body aches, my heart aches, my stomach is just twisted right now to speak about this brave friend of mine. Imagine my initial shock when I read that this incident occurred in Portland and in Oregon. And then just imagine how my heart dropped when I found out it was somebody that I knew. I met, Rick is a veteran and a member of my church and somebody that I met during my campaign for county clerk in 2014 in the primary. And, you know, when I found out that he was the one that stood up, I was not surprised. He is what I call a hero. I first got to know Rick and his wife, Mian, in 2014. And I grew to respect Rick as I watched how he ran his campaign. He repeatedly stressed how he would stand by his moral convictions and was only running to do what was right for Clackamas County and his community. He further impressed me when he refused to accept any donations. Rick was a man who put his family, his community, and his country before himself. As I mentioned, Rick was also a member of our church. Him and his wife and his 4 children would sit right behind our family on Mass on Saturday evenings. And even after losing our races in 2014, our friendship continued to grow through our faith and service. He was the first person to offer a fellow parishioner a hand up, and he was very well known to his church as a dedicated husband and loving father. As I reflect on the whole that this will bring to our community and our church and his family, I know that we don't want his death to be in vain. And I hope we can all learn to really grow to a greater understanding of each other. As I reflect on the wonderful legislative prayer breakfast we just had with Paul Young and the Shack, and trying to think about forgiveness, it's going to be very difficult for us to forgive this horrific act. But as I stand here, we are not the judge, and I know that whatever act occurred, he will have to pay for. But I want the payment that these three young men provided to be payment forward of what it takes to stand together as a community. And I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. For the remonstrances, Representative Vial.
Our family Labor Day, Memorial Day celebrations, like all of the celebrations in our family, tend to be large and raucous and very mixed race. The Viet family was out in force this weekend, and on Friday evening as we gathered at the coast, it was a lot of the Viet teenagers that were asking Grandpa, what's going on? Unlike my colleagues, I didn't know any of these people, but I can tell you the effect of this event was profound in the discussion that we had in our family. It was interesting, however, because that discussion then morphed from fear into true curiosity by these children as to what happens next. And my wife said, what happens next is up to us. Sometimes it's little incidents like this that actually lead to war, that actually means that people will be called upon by their governments to go serve in the ultimate way, to die, to sacrifice, just like these three men did in a train station in Portland. Ultimately, the discussion turned to that war that had caused the parents of these grandchildren of mine to end up here in America. And the fact that some 60,000 of our brothers and sisters, citizens of America, died in that war, and over 2 million of the Vietnamese brothers and sisters of these children died in that war. And I was grateful that ultimately the discussion came around to we have to be very careful. We have to be careful to moderate the things that we say. We have to be very thoughtful about taking a position against brothers and sisters wherever they may be. I'm really proud of these kids. Their conversation reminded me that it is up to us to be so careful not to judge another not to speak ill of another, not to make those comments that would somehow trigger perhaps someone who's suffering from mental illness to lash out and do the things that happened on Friday night. We have that opportunity to moderate in all things, and it's my prayer that we do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. For the remonstrances, Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to say to my colleagues over here on the other side of the aisle, your words today have been beautiful and they have been inspiring. And Representative Meek, I heard for you, my friend. That is awful. Question now comes, where do we go after something like this? And one of the most dangerous things we live with in this day and age is fear. A lot of times, I'm in the news business and I don't even want to listen to it because it just spurs us to fear. The commentators and the news people are constantly stirring us to fear. When I come into times like this, I have to rely on the things that I believe in and the things that I know to be true. And I run to the Bible, the Holy Scriptures, when I am out of answers as to what's going on today. 1 John chapter 4, verse 18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. Representative Marsh, you were referring to love a few moments ago, and a lot of people talk about love in songs and literature, and everybody has their take on it, but I think we can kind of gather around that word today. Love is the answer as we go forward in these very, very difficult times. So thank you again for your inspiration today and your good words. And again, Representative Meek, I'm really sorry about what's happened here, especially for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. For the remonstrances, Representative McLean.
Thank you. Colleagues, I have heard the words spoken by those who have lost friends and who have lost constituents and whose very district has been traumatized. And I rise today to speak clearly to my fellow Oregonians and to my colleagues on the floor of this House that there is no place for hate in our state, and we stand together as one house. We're neither urban nor rural, Democrat nor Republican, but we are members of one house that stand united to denounce hate in our state. Whether the weapons brandished by this sick individual were words before he brandished a knife, the fact is that hate has no place here. We suffered a horrible loss, and we stand with the families and grieve with you. No greater love hath anyone amongst us than to lay down his or her life for another and for a friend. And that's what happened. I hope we can remember that the love we saw displayed in standing up for each other in your district, Representative Smith Warner, will be the legacy of this tragedy, not the hate. So, Madam Speaker, I, like so many here, want to be clear that this is one united House, and we are one united Oregon. And we will forever remember the sacrifice of our fellow Oregonians standing up against hatred. And we stand united that there is no place for it in our state. Thank you, Madam Speaker.